Something significant happened in Washington over the weekend, and what matters is not just the incident itself, but the response to it. A shooting took place in the lobby of the Washington Hilton Hotel, the venue hosting the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner, one of the most high-profile gatherings of the year. The President of the United States, his cabinet, the Vice President, congressional leaders, and hundreds of journalists were inside. And in the hours that followed, a cascade of political responses, coordinated messaging, and factual contradictions emerged that demands clear-eyed examination. Let's go through it together, claim by claim, piece by piece. The suspect has been identified as Cole Thomas Allen, a 31-year-old from Torrance, California. He holds a mechanical engineering degree from the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, where he graduated in 2017. He later earned a master's degree in computer science from California State University Dominguez Hills in 2025. During his undergraduate years, he worked as a student researcher at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and was recognized locally for developing a wheelchair emergency brake prototype. Here is where the picture gets complicated. Despite the dramatic nature of the event, administration officials themselves acknowledged significant distance between the shooter and the ballroom. Allen had booked a room in the Washington Hilton itself and was apprehended after rushing a security checkpoint outside the main ballroom area, not inside it. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche confirmed on national television that the suspect barely broke the perimeter and described the breach as being by a matter of feet. Multiple law enforcement officials noted that the shooting occurred on a floor above the ballroom, up a staircase, and through several layers of security. The Washington Hilton had not been fully secured by the Secret Service. Only the specific areas designated for the dinner had been locked down, because the rest of the hotel was open to the public for other functions. Allen came armed with a shotgun, a handgun, and knives. He fired at Secret Service agents. One agent was struck, the round hitting a bulletproof vest, and the agent was uninjured. Allen was subdued and taken into custody. Before the attack, he sent writings to family members stating clearly that he intended to target administration officials. His sister, after the shooting, informed the Secret Service that her brother had a tendency toward radical statements and had spoken of wanting to do something to address what he saw as the failings of the current administration. He has since been charged with assault on a federal officer and using a firearm during a crime of violence. This is a serious incident. No one should minimize that. A man armed with multiple weapons traveled across the country, booked into the venue, and attempted to breach security with stated political intent. That is, without question, an alarming attack on public safety. But within 30 minutes of the incident, the political machine was already in motion, and it moved in a very specific direction. President Trump held a press conference from the White House shortly after being evacuated from the dinner. Rather than focusing primarily on the safety of those present or the ongoing law enforcement response, he used the moment to advocate for the construction of a secure ballroom on White House grounds. He told reporters, and then posted the following morning on social media, that this incident was proof of exactly why a new, fortified ballroom was needed at the White House. He called for all legal challenges to the ballroom project to be dropped immediately, saying the lawsuit must not be allowed with construction. That ballroom project has been one of the most controversial elements of Trump's second term. The administration demolished the White House's historic East Wing last fall to clear the site. The planned facility, estimated to cost upward of $400 million, would seat approximately 1,000 guests. The National Trust for Historic Preservation sued in December, arguing that the administration proceeded without the required congressional approval. Courts have been wrestling with the case since, with construction proceeding in fits and starts under competing court orders. Now, in the wake of Saturday's shooting, the Justice Department sent a letter to the trust's legal counsel demanding that the lawsuit be dropped by 9 o'clock Monday morning, explicitly citing the shooting as justification. The letter called the Washington Hilton demonstrably unsafe for events involving the president and suggested that the existence of the new ballroom would have prevented the incident entirely. Whether that claim holds up to scrutiny is a separate question. The Correspondents' Dinner is not a White House event. It is organized by an independent nonprofit journalists association and hosted at a commercial hotel precisely to underscore the independence of the press from the executive branch. Moving it inside the White House perimeter would fundamentally alter what the event is supposed to represent. That distinction did not slow the drumbeat. Within hours of the shooting, Republican lawmakers, administration officials, and a significant portion of the MAGA media ecosystem were all pushing the same message. The ballroom is a national security necessity. Senator Lindsey Graham called it a national security necessity. Representative Jim Jordan said he agreed with the president 100%. And Representative Chip Roy went further, arguing that any upcoming Department of Homeland Security funding legislation should explicitly include funding for the ballroom, tying the shooting directly to a legislative vehicle that also addresses immigration enforcement, targeted funding provisions, and the ongoing culture war battles over transgender rights and abortion access. This response must be understood against the backdrop of where the administration stood going into the weekend. Multiple polls released in the days before the dinner showed the president's overall approval rating at 33% in one major poll, with economic approval as low as 30% in another. These are historically low numbers. Context provided by political analysts suggested the figures were approaching the kinds of lows last seen in the presidency of George W. Bush during the height of the Iraq War, and before that, in the presidency of Jimmy Carter. Trump's disapproval on inflation was running near 70% in several polls, and on the Iran war, the numbers were similarly bleak. Those numbers frame the shooting's political aftermath. When a leader facing historically low approval ratings emerges from a dramatic security incident, leverages it to push a specific construction project, receives synchronized public messaging from dozens of allies, and has the Justice Department weaponize it against pending litigation, all within 12 hours, that pattern deserves scrutiny, not celebration. There is a second layer of context that had been dominating the news cycle on Friday, the day before the dinner. For weeks, the Trump administration had been building toward a major diplomatic breakthrough with Iran, brokered through Pakistan. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were to lead an American delegation to Islamabad to meet with Iranian counterparts as part of ongoing ceasefire and nuclear negotiations. These negotiations had been running against the backdrop of a war that began in late February, when the United States and Israel launched large-scale strikes on Iran. The conflict closed the Strait of Hormuz to significant shipping traffic, sending energy prices across the globe into sharp upward spirals. On Friday, Trump told reporters and the markets that a major diplomatic meeting was imminent in Pakistan. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was indeed in Islamabad, but the meeting with the American delegation never occurred. Trump canceled the trip, announcing that Iran had submitted a document that should have been better. The White House then indicated the trip was not worth making for a proposal that did not meet baseline requirements. Araghchi departed for Russia. The collapse of those talks, and the suggestion that the administration had built up market expectations around a diplomatic breakthrough that did not materialize, was the dominant story heading into Saturday evening. The shooting, whatever its ultimate significance, arrived at a remarkably convenient news cycle moment. What drew attention from observers in the hours after the shooting was the tone and public demeanor of senior administration figures. Photographs and videos circulated showing top officials in visibly high spirits, smiling, laughing, appearing to celebrate at what was, in theory, the scene of a serious attempt on the life of the president and senior government officials. Administration attorney Alina Habba posted publicly after the incident about her appearance that evening, calling her look a personal triumph. These are subjective observations, but they were widely noticed and contrasted sharply with the gravity typically associated with genuine assassination attempts. It is also worth noting the question of security protocols. Every administration in living memory has maintained the practice of a designated survivor, a senior official kept away from gatherings where the entire line of presidential succession is concentrated in one place. At Saturday's dinner, the president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of the Treasury were all present in the same building. 5 of the first 6 people in the presidential line of succession were together in a commercial hotel that had not been fully secured. When Todd Blanche was asked about this directly on a Sunday morning news program, he did not directly address the protocol failure. He said instead that this administration will not stop doing things like attending public events, and that the shooter's failure to succeed meant the system worked. That framing deserves examination. A shooter who booked a hotel room, passed through multiple points of access, and fired at federal agents, injuring one, represents a significant security breach. Whether the system worked, in the sense that no one was killed, is a fair point. Whether the system performed as it should have is a separate and legitimate question. Parts of the mainstream media immediately moved toward a unity narrative, framing the administration's response as measured and even courageous. Some anchors invited Democratic guests to acknowledge that political rhetoric had perhaps contributed to an atmosphere that produced political violence, even as the facts of the shooter's precise motivations were still emerging. Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin, appearing on television Sunday morning, resisted that framing directly. He pointed to what he described as documented political violence against citizens in Minneapolis who were exercising their First Amendment rights. He argued that the press remained the public's most important institutional ally and should not abandon its role as a watchdog, regardless of the circumstances of the shooting. Representative Ro Khanna made the economic case against the Iran war in television appearances the same morning, noting that gas prices, food prices, and housing costs had all risen significantly since the conflict began, a conflict that most Americans, including more than half of self-identified Republicans in polling, want to end through negotiation rather than continued military escalation. He also referenced the canceled Pakistan talks as an example of the administration's failure to follow through on peace commitments. Meanwhile, in a different part of the media ecosystem, political activists were using the shooting to push legislation. One prominent conservative voter outreach organizer called on Republican Senate leadership to return to Washington and pass what he called the Save America Act, explicitly framing the attempt as a Democratic effort to assassinate the president, an extraordinarily charged allegation made without evidence in the hours immediately following the event. Others claim that the Secret Service agent who was shot had been working without pay due to the ongoing government shutdown. This claim was false. Secret Service agents have continued to receive pay throughout the period of governmental funding uncertainty. Step back from the immediate politics of Saturday night, and several larger patterns come into view. The global energy crisis tied to the Iran war is having real consequences. Reporting from across Asia shows acute shortages of crude oil, with Japanese state television, a reliable barometer of economic anxiety in that country, dedicating prominent coverage to the arrival of single oil tankers as major news events. The Strait of Hormuz remains a flashpoint, with roughly a fifth of the world's oil and gas transit passing through it under current conditions of partial Iranian control. On the domestic front, reporting continued over the weekend on conditions aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, where photographs obtained by news outlets showed service members receiving what were described as minimal food portions. Reports suggested that some personnel had lost significant weight over the course of the deployment. These conditions among active duty troops deserve sustained attention, regardless of whatever else is in the news cycle. There was also continued reporting on the Epstein investigation and the question of potential pardons for those connected to Jeffrey Epstein's network of abuse. Survivors of that abuse were in Washington over the weekend to advocate for accountability, as reporting circulated suggesting that discussions within Republican circles had included the possibility of executive clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell. Here is the bottom line. A real man with real weapons traveled to Washington and attempted to cause real harm at a real event. That is not nothing. That is serious. Cole Allen faces serious federal charges and will be prosecuted accordingly. But what follows from that fact is not automatically a mandate for any specific political agenda. It is not automatic justification for a $400 million construction project. It is not a reason to drop a pending preservation lawsuit. It is not a basis for using emergency legislative vehicles to advance unrelated culture war priorities. And it is not evidence that this or any other political figure acted with particular courage or restraint. The press, the public, and elected officials all deserve to have this episode examined on its actual merits. The security failures that occurred, the protocols that were not followed, the political exploitation that followed within minutes, and the broader context in which this nation finds itself. At war abroad, with economic pain at home, and with a government whose approval is at historic lows navigating all of it in real time. That scrutiny is not disrespect for the gravity of what happened Saturday night. It is the only appropriate response to it.